So when I got an opportunity to talk about and moderate this session, it almost seemed oxymoronish for me when I was told we need to talk about leading through unprecedented times. In my mind, leadership has always been about leading the unknown, leading through change, and anything that is predictable, it is basically managing predictable. So leadership has always been about kind of managing through the unknown and changing through the unknown. So my first question to all of you is, while the value system, the underlying value system of any organization almost remains unchanged or evolves with context, what are the leadership behaviors that would need to role model to manage any unprecedented times and lead change?
Uh, Pritam, what you said is right. Organizations have a DNA and a culture which doesn't change, but leaders often are able to bring out the best in that. What I feel is that we need to look at authenticity, resilience, and the ability to see the big picture and connect the dots. It is no different from a regular business situation, but in unpredictable times, these things become more important because you are actually mapping the situation as it is evolving and trying to manage it and take it forward. So I think these 3, 4 elements lay the bedrock on which then the other elements of leadership can come into play.
Pranali, is it any different for you?
Well, I'd say that in today's times with distributed teams and hybrid or remote models, to me what stands out is how can a leader build a culture of trust for their team? And it's not just trust, but lead with positive intent. You can no longer see your team on a 8 hour or 10 hour or whatever it is basis, and the only way to manage, I feel, is by empowering, trusting, and letting them do their best. So for me, that's really the number one. I'll also add one more point, which I think is important. When you talk about unprecedented changes, you don't know what's coming up. And I think there, the leader for tomorrow or even today needs to come down from the know-it-all attitude to seeking solutions from team members. And I think the first step there is to admit or show some sense of vulnerability. I think, leaders are always depicted as being the strong people you go to when you have a problem. I think times have changed. And you start off by showing some sense of vulnerability where you're going to a team and co-creating the solution. I'll stop there.
Oh, that's helpful. Ranjan, what's about you?
Yeah. Taking on from what Pranali said, I represent a company which is 100 years old, which has very traditional, very brick and mortar. And it was running in some equilibrium till 2019. Suddenly the equilibrium broke with workplace changes, a lot of things, a lot of unprecedented activities. So as Pranali said, that like earlier days, leaders cannot solve all the problems. So in the new after this realization, I think the 2, 3 very key behaviors that leaders need to demonstrate. Number one, there has to be a much higher level of communication up and down and horizontal. That has to increase because everybody doesn't know everything and things are changing, number one. Number two, I think leaders need to understand what to let go and what to control. Because you cannot control everything in this unprecedented world. And also a third thing which I personally feel is very important is that, the world will create a lot of unfairness, a lot of destabilization. So a leader has to be firm but fair in today's context because you cannot give everything to everybody, but you should be seen as firm but fair. So I think that these three are, to me, are kind of evolving in the days to come.
Great. So resilience, authentic empathy, being vulnerable, co-creating is probably the behavior. So I'll probably share a real example that I personally lived through in the recent past. the leader that I worked with, who I partnered with, who was a CEO, I'd asked him a question after a very intense meeting. What do you think was your role or is your role as a leader? And he very humbly submitted that my only role is to create a common sense of purpose and belief. And I measure my effectiveness with the level of energy with which an individual or a team enters my room and the level of energy with which an individual or team leaves my room. If I can make that 1x to 10x, then I believe I'm an effective leader. So I think that's what most of my co-panelists have kind of, in short, summarized. Another, context that emerges, right, thank you, are traditional organization design principles draw a lot of spans and controls, making leadership roles, far too big to manage large teams. The effectiveness of leadership roles is sized on the number of people they manage. And over a period of time, it creates distance in the organization. And there is a lot of impersonal management, right? How do you think it is in our gift or the organization's gift to, especially in context of hybrid working, being able to create a more personal organization with an effective organization design?
Okay.
Ranjan.
I'll take it. So, as you rightly said, say a senior leader or a middle management leader normally has large teams. And it is not possible for them to connect to everybody, know everybody by name if the team sizes are large. I think somewhere you also mentioned that, right, research says that 1:50 is the right ratio. But, today the organization, what I experience, have got multi-generation workforce. We have the baby boomers, we have the Gen X like us, the Gen Y, and Gen Z is yet to come. And each of their engagement needs are very different. And a central leader sitting in the corporate office and they make policies may not be always very personalized and engaging to all these different generations. So all the more, I think organizations should make people management more flexible to a leader of that unit. It's like an army. There is a Gorkha regiment. If there is a leader, he should have the right or he should have the means to engage his regiment of 50 people under some broad army guidelines, but in his own flexibility. So those centralized, yet the organization design should be more centralized, yet more personalized at a leadership level of a smaller unit.
Okay. Tribes over countries. Rajeev.
I think organization design is something which is always playing a catch-up game. So you have an organization design and then it doesn't change for years on end, even though there are tectonic shifts in workplace and, including the hybrid you mentioned. I think we need to give organization design the importance it deserves and do it more consciously and more proactively rather than letting it emerge as an outcome of some change. So I think organization design and structuring is not a bad word. It is not something to be uncomfortable with. And how to make it palatable and how to make it talk to the reality of today is something which most organizations would need to do. And I think as HR leaders, our challenge is how to ensure that we are one step ahead and not two steps behind. So from that perspective, we need to kind of, till the time, because this catch-up will continue given the pace of change, till the time we are able to be in a situation where org design and the situation on the ground is in consonance, we should supplement it with multiple items, whether it is listening mechanisms, cultural interventions, and, effectiveness of leadership in carrying out the tasks it lays out for itself.
Pranali, any view at all on this for you?
I think, a lot has been said. The one thing I'll add is it's time that we focus on the quality of the interactions and not just the quantity. So you might have a team of 50, you might have a team of, 20 or 100. I think what's important is when you interact with your team members, how effectively are you listening to them? Are you there fully? I think a lot of multitasking happens nowadays during meetings, particularly in the hybrid setup. So even if you give time, you're not really fully giving it. So the way to optimize for me is whatever time you'd make it your 100%.
I just want to add one point here because it just came to my mind, it will be relevant. As you could see this conference, even the conference nature is changing. So I think there is a, we all, all HR or parallel, some of you are partly from HR. We are used to seeing very organized structure, top management, middle management. I think now project organization as a concept is also coming in. Because no more it is just a hierarchy of span. And so, for example, if you are, any of you who are from a product industry might have heard of NPD, a new product development. So it is, so you create a team cross-functionally, and for that project, that's the organization. So OD, you mentioned, it's not anymore, may not be anymore going into future only vertical setups of pyramids. It will be capturing people from different skill sets and create an organization for that project. And there you might apply 1:50 principle, and it might work like that. And that's one trend that I'm seeing happening.
That's a very interesting perspective, Ranjan. And very incidentally, this is leading into my next thought when each one of you have indicated the need for authentically engaging and communicating the intent, either through precedented change or unprecedented change. What's new is we are a digital community, and the way we consume information, preferred way of consuming information is consciously shifted to digital mediums, right? Are we using it effectively, and are we limiting it only to communicate? Is there an opportunity in the hybrid world to use digital communities and digital touch points beyond communication and extend it to engagement? Is there any experience that you have that you think in your context will help us unravel this?
Yeah, I could take that since I come from the tech world. And besides that, sitting in an HR tech conference, you can't say anything else, right? So I'd say when the world pivoted to remote and now hybrid, the pendulum kind of swung completely on the technology side, and we all went digital. I think in that process, I still feel a little bit of the human element was lost. And when you say meaningful communication or meaningful engagement through digital challenges, I think that happens through a partnership between the human and the tech worlds. So technology enabled for sure, but human led. So for example, I think listening to the organization has become so important, especially world of shuffling of priorities, etc. So we're using a lot of the chatbots. These reach out proactively to people. We're also using a lot of predictive analytics, to find out how people are thinking. It could be certain kind of triggers that are getting set off by the way certain announcements happen in an organization, or certain moments that come up in an associate's own lifespan in an organization. But a lot of chatbots, a lot of the real-time polls that we are running through digital channels, I think this also helps to get a pulse back. And then we top it up by HR still engaging in focus group discussions. And these are sometimes very open, some are digital, but some are in real time. We even fly people down if they want to come and talk about it. So I think combinations like this are those that really help. And there are many, many more. I think you take a walk around and there are so many digital options available.
So Rajeev, just as an extension, right? Digital also has the risk of impersonalizing, and engagement needs a lot of personalizing, right? So if we extend digital platforms to engagement beyond communication, how can we ensure that that authenticity and personalization continues to remain?
Pritam, I think we need to take the media, digital media, beyond transaction. Not all of us are digital natives. And there are multiple generations at work which are using the same, consuming the same media and, trying to communicate. Unfortunately, most of the time, each exchange or interaction is a transaction. I think we need to elevate from the transaction to an engagement and a connect. And the time we are able to do that, that is where authenticity, empathy, and an interaction comes into play. And from that perspective, I think there needs to be a conscious uh, study of how to use this medium. Not everybody knows how to use it. And while it may be intuitive for Gen Z, it may not be intuitive for some of the rest of the workforce.
Very, very interesting that you say that. And as I come to think of it, right, while we use all the mediums and platforms that we have, many of the leaders take the responsibility on their shoulders to create and influence a culture of play to win. But most often than not, the well-being is somewhere off the radar, right? So how can leaders influence a play to win mindset, keeping the well-being in the middle of it? So that kind of summarizes the leadership presence as a whole, right? So any ideas about it?
So at iCertis, we have a saying, love to win, but don't be afraid to lose. We actually have, put some phrases together. And the subtle difference there in this is actually, I think the essence of the question is that you should love to win, you should go all out, okay? You go your 200% and there's no other thing that's in your mind except to win. You push, it's tough deadlines, it's long hours, everything, but not at the cost of a compromise. And that compromise can be in terms of ethic, that compromise can be in terms of well-being of the assertions or the employees in the organization. So to that extent, even through the pandemic, we came up with a small framework we call the 4 rings of responsibility, which is very simple. Ring 1 is take care of yourself, ring 2 is take care of your family, 3 is community, and 4th is business. And it is in that sequence. So anytime somebody feels that, hey, I'm being stretched too much or this is getting too much for me, you say, I have a ring 1 to take care of, or I have a ring 2. So you kind of make it safe to say that you need some time off, because your manager may not always see it that way. So these are kind of things that we said, okay, you don't compromise, especially in a high growth organization, on what is needed to go all out and win, but not at a cost.
Interesting. So Rajiv, can business outcomes be accomplished along with well-being?
I think we need to change the definition of both outcome and well-being. When you say play to win, there is an element of competitiveness. And that ruthless competitiveness assumes that it has to be at all costs. So I believe the outcome has to be a win-win for all stakeholders who are part of the transaction. And well-being is something which is so inherent that it is not a license for laxity. At the same time, it is also not something which you can ignore. So the ability of carrying people along for task accomplishment is very critical. Somewhere we also assume that a lot of things are non-negotiable. In fact, they are not. One can always be agile and improvise as you go along. And I think changing some of the assumptions on competitiveness would definitely help in bringing well-being to the center. One more thing, well-being is not something for lip sympathy or something to be spoken about, but something to be practiced. While we are very careful how we communicate on well-being, by emphasizing that the task still needs to be done as per original commitments, we are also undermining what we would have expected the individual to do. So I think it's a very delicate balancing which leaders need to do. But in the end, well-being comes first. The humanness of the human comes first. And if it does, you will end up winning any which way.
That's wonderful. That's a wonderful comment to kind of conclude on. So I think through all your experiences world over, we've recognized that leaders as coaches are any day more effective in bringing collective outcomes than leaders as referees. So I guess what we're all trying to say is, as we're able to HR leaders, as we're able to enable our leaders to become more effective coaches, I think all of the unprecedented or unknown that we wish to manage gets addressed in a very authentic way by itself.
If you give me 1 minute, just to make the panel discussion a little more interesting on this last question of yours, I will, because I think co-panelists have talked a lot about this. So on this question, I'll take 1 minute to flip the question a different way, just to, you said achievement, but there should be a
Well-being.
well-being. So for a moment, if I shift all of our focus from office to home, okay, you're either a child or you're a parent. We want our child to achieve, but not at the cost of his well-being, right? You just shift the focus, because the problem is in management world, we try to formatize everything, and we have a format and SOP for everything. But if we just think how we manage our home, we drive achievement in children, but not compromising the well-being. So if we can do that as a parent, it is a similar behavior. One can do it in office, just that it's a. So I think a lot of coaching, rightly as you said, is required, because from school till today, nobody teaches this subject called human behavior. It's never there in school, college, MBA, nowhere. So people are normally not trained. But I think that organizations, we need to spend a lot of time on coaching people to behave normally, have conversations like we do at home, and I think this balance will come.
That's a beautiful perspective, Rajit. That's a beautiful perspective. So, folks, any questions for the esteemed panelists on leading through unprecedented times?
I don't know, it's too noisy whether they...
Do we have any questions?
So this question I have is to all the panel, but I would like Preetham to definitely take this one. I want you to know, with all that is happening around with the economy, the macroeconomic factors changing, and what is happening with Fed and RBI and everyone now tightening the screws on economy, looks like we are headed to a very bad winter, right? If that is the case, and if that happens, as HR professionals, what are the skill sets that we should be ready with in terms of getting ready for those unpredictable times? If they are to come, we really don't know now, but if they are to come, what should we be ready with?
I'm really hopeful they don't hit our shores. World over, the analysis says that India has the lowest probability to the extent of 0% of getting into a recession. But should something of that sort reach our shores, I think we have 4 decades of having seen 4 large such recessions, and each of them have taught us in a very difficult manner how to manage through the downturn and how to ensure that the organizational strength and assets are protected, right? Far too often, and I and Rajeev were talking about it, we become so objective about performance, productivity, and objectivity that we tend to lose the human element. So we as HR leaders and people leaders, right, have to be a business peer function and ensure that the people priorities and the people emotions are protected at every cost. I believe there's a lot of maturity over the last 4 decades organizations have developed. Younger organizations probably not, and if they're able to leverage it from organizations that are tenured, then nothing like it. But there hasn't been, in the last 4 decades, all the recessions that probably have hit even the largest economies haven't lasted beyond 9 or 12 months. Any impulsive decision that is taken for that short period has a very long-lasting impact on the top line of the organization. And we as custodians have to stand up and hold the mirror. My view is that.
Thank you so much. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you.
My name is Ishan. I'm the CEO of Icarus 3D. And so we are a small organization, 60 people. And we deal in augmented reality and virtual reality. So one of the things that have been coming up recently more and more is grievance handling. Grievance handling. As a small organization, any tips from tenured organizations like yours that how to go about it? Is there any specific setups that we should go for? I've been thinking of bringing in a clinical psychologist just for grievance handling part, but any suggestions would be more than welcome.
So you touched upon a very sensitive topic, and I think there are different categories of employee grievances. I think some are work related. Then, through the pandemic, there have been very heavy issues that have come up also, like how do you handle grief? And it's been very real for several people. So when you talk about a clinical psychologist, I think employee assistance programs and especially grief management services, those have emerged a lot, and one should take recourse to such things for, I would say, very severe, not grievances, but very severe issues that are popping up because of these kind of backgrounds. At the same time, I think for the normal grievances, what people miss is an empathetic and a listening ear. And with digital channels, that is getting difficult. So that is where I think that little bit of extra effort HR needs to take to put some kind of a human face and a sensitivity around how this is managed. Comes to the manager, managers need coaching, particularly in dealing with remotely. How do you handle such issues? So I'd say it's definitely an area that's coming to be a slight concern in today's hybrid world and needs to be dealt with sensitively.
So I'll just try to add on my 2 cents, right? More often than not, organizations believe that psychological safety can be afforded only after you hit a certain scale and stability. Until that scale and stability, psychological safety cannot be afforded. This is a perception, this is a myth. In reality, it doesn't matter how large or how small an organization you are, psychological safety is an intent and is a leadership value and behavior that has to be consistently demonstrated. And this cannot be built without focusing on mental well-being being the highest of priority. So even more so in a segment where you are driving research and innovation. Healthy minds, healthy creations. So mental well-being and psychological safety is of the fundamental value.
I want to say just one thing. You can't outsource mental well-being. Nothing to beat a genuine, personalized conversation, dialogue with the employee. And I think that's something which we started out also, the era of impersonal evolution of large organizations. So you are in a very fortunate situation that you still have numbers which are easy to manage and personalize. I think that will go a long way.
I think we're done. We're done with the session. Okay, one question. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Vanita. My question is to Rajeev. Other panelists can also add. You had mentioned that the shift of conversations have to move from being transactional to more on the well-being side or the employee engaging side. Based on your experience, how do you usually navigate these conversations, or how do you shift the focus of the transactional nature of the conversations to more engaging towards the well-being?
What I meant was that most of the communication which comes from the digital medium is top-down. It's messaging, it's one-sided messaging saying, coming up with some org announcement or some event, I haven't seen leaders actually engage with employees by having an open dialogue, and I think just beginning to having that dialogue, having an open conversation, and on a variety of topics, which not necessarily be organizational or technology or product, it could be anything out of that also, is the very important to start that journey of having conversations. So, and I think most of the time those conversations don't happen because we are not sure where they may lead to. But if organization is headed by leaders who are surely knowing what to do, they'll figure it out, which may at times even say, I don't know. I'm constantly asked that what is our stance on work from home? And quite honestly, I don't know because it is evolving. And that ability to say that we will evolve and we'll get back to you once we figure out is also the start of a conversation.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Ranjan, Pranali, Rajeev. It's been a pleasure having this interaction with you. And I hope the audience has taken away a wealth of information on managing leadership through unprecedented times. Thank you.
Thank you.